Hi, it's Mizzo. Okay, so I am gonna share some tips for speech too, and this video, the first part of this video is made specifically for our class to sort of answer questions and give sort of a specific guideline for where we're at. And then I'm stitch incoming, as they say. Although, can you stitch with yourself? I don't know. And then I've got another video that I made a few years ago that all that content is awesome. And so I'm just going to stitch them together. And so the first thing is when we're thinking about speech two, we're thinking about argumentation and persuasion. And sometimes people will ask, what's the difference? Functionally, you will hear people use them interchangeably. Okay. And if you want to get a PhD in rhetoric like I have, you can sit in rhetorical theory classes and debate the nuances, and it would be very fun, right? We have that here. You can come to PhD school here. But functionally, for our purposes at this level, I think the easiest way to kind of understand the distinction is persuasion is the trip. Persuasion is the journey, the vacation. Argumentation is the mode or the way we get there. So, where are we going? I did this in class the other day, and a student who is hilarious and awesome walked in late right as I was doing this. And he's from Milwaukee, and he's black, and he's so cool. And, he does TikTok dances on our break and whatnot. And I was like, hey, where are we going? And he was like, New Jersey. And I was like, okay, I guess we're going to New Jersey, right? How are we getting to New Jersey? And he's like, on a train. And I was like, we're all riding on a train in New Jersey. I hope everybody packed deodorant, right? But how else could you get to New Jersey, right? You could take a plane. You could drive. So that's argumentation. It's like, what is the specific argument or like way I'm getting you to? And then persuasion is the journey, the destination, the goal, the change. Okay, so speech two builds from your first speech. So it's like your first speech set up a foundation. This is the problem. This is the community concern. And then your second speech does two things. It creates a specific argument. So, a specific thing that you're saying, this is how we make change. This is how we deal with or change or put our energy behind this problem, right? This situation. And then it calls your specific audience to action. Okay. So it's got to do two things in 6 to 8 minutes. Oh, ha! I made balloons go off. Amazing. Is that because I did this? Is that why? And then it makes balloons go off? No. Okay. So you are finding a specific argument, and most likely it's going to be something that someone's already talking about. Because remember, we've been talking about how these join a conversation. You're going to go find where we can all put our effort. Who is writing a bill? Did they do this in another state? Is there, right, like where do you suggest, because you've now become pretty much an expert on this issue, that we like, where's the argument, where's the best place to put our energy, the best next step, the best thing to do? There might be lots of ways to solve this issue, but what are you arguing is the best thing to do? And you're probably listening to a community, right? That's telling you that's the best thing to do. And you're like the ambassador, and then you're calling us to action. Okay. So, couple of things that people often ask that I just want to make sure to address. The first one is, can I change my speech topic? And is a complicated answer because don't say no, well, right? I'm not super into like forcing you to keep a topic, but also I don't think of this as like the same topic. Like I think most students do. I think that's what makes sense. But for me, it's like use your first speech to build. So some of those are really linear, really feel like the same topic. So if my community concern was segregation in Milwaukee, And that first speech, I set up the history of the red lines and how the areas in Milwaukee play out in terms of money and policy and regulations and all of that, and how that's pretty segregated. Um, my speech too is probably going to be something specifically about segregation in Milwaukee, right? And then I'm making an argument that this needs to pass, or we need reparations here, or we need to do this like this, and here's how we can do it. Call this person, sign this thing, go to this event, right? Call to action. That's a pretty linear, right? If I'm talking about gun control or, gun issues in the first speech and the crisis around guns in this country, that second speech is probably making an argument for specific gun change, specific gun policy change, specific something, call to action, here's how we do that, right? But let's say you did a speech on the wage gap, okay, and you specifically focused on the gender wage gap. And so you talked in that first speech, you talked a lot about how women make less money and the different types of women, right? Race, sexuality, and how that intersects. And then, you learned a lot about this. And in your research, you came across something that talked about, well, not only is the issue that there's a wage gap, so women, femme bodies make less money, but also they have to buy things specifically for them that we tax, like menstrual products. And so you started reading about that, right? And you're like, oh my gosh, I didn't realize menstrual products were taxed and not supported and like could be given out free much more regularly, like condoms, right? So, you did this first speech on the wage gap and set up a lot of this sort of inequity, and specifically in wage issues. You could then do a second speech arguing that we need to stop taxing menstrual products. Now, feels like a new topic or a bit of a jump, but do you see how I'm still able to like use my research, like flow through with the audience? It's a bit of a link, I have to say, in my last speech, I don't have to, but the idea is, right, like in my last speech, I specifically talked about, this inequity, but it's not just about wage gap, but it's also about products costing more. And so I'm going to argue that, right? So that's the first thing. Don't let my like rules stifle you in any way. Do what feels best for the topic. So I like, if you are feeling uninspired, don't want to work on it, don't, then like, yeah, do follow whatever works for you. The downsides to doing something completely different, right? Because I set these assignments up to flow into each other. The downsides to doing a completely different topic are you're a double-edged sword. So either you have to take time to do that setup that in theory people did in speech one, and then you have less time for your argument and call to action. The speech is only 6 to 8 minutes, which feels like a long time, but it's not, right? And so if you do an entirely new thing, you either have to take time to set that up, or you don't take time to set that up and just jump in with the argument, and then people don't have that information. I mean, it can work, but do you see how then you're kind of at a disadvantage because you're trying to make an argument and call to action, and they don't have all of this background information about the issue. So that's kind of the pros cons of like how you should design your second speech topic in connection to that first one, and just be thinking about that. I know most of you are already starting to work on speech too. This is just like something to help guide you. But, right, do what works. So I had a student one time, and he his first speech was on vitamin D deficiencies in men. And this was a summer course, and he it was the summer that they were working to pass the ADA. I've been reading and doing a lot of disability stuff recently. The ACA, the Affordable Care Act, health insurance, there we are. ADA is, of course, the American Disabilities Act, which, fun fact, was not signed until the 90s. Go look that up. That'll blow your brain. By a Bush. Unbelievable. Um, and go look up the Capitol crawl, which is what led us to sign the ADA. Okay, so they were signing the ACA, Affordable Care Act. And so he kind of did the second speech about vitamin D, kind of, but it was kind of weird and disconnected. And then at the end, he basically was like, we need to pass the ADA and you need to call or the ACA, and you need to call your representatives and blah, blah, blah. And so I talked to him afterwards and I was like, why didn't you just do the speech on the ACA? And he was like, I thought I had to be the same topic. And I was like, well, but like you're talking about health issues, and like those health issues are dependent on our healthcare system. Like to me, that was a very logical link. But to him in his student brain, he was like, must have same topic. Don't let those rules mess you up. The goal of these speeches, right, is to set up something and then flow the specific argument from it, and then call us to action. So if you can flow us with a few links, so even though it feels a little like nonlinear, do it, right? Whatever works, whatever makes sense. And then the other big thing is, don't feel like you have to take a side. That's a thing that will trap people, is that they get this idea that like I'm in an issue and it's either this or this, right? I'm either pro this or anti this. But a couple things there. One, most of the controversial issues aren't actually cited. So what is the opposite of pro-life? If you said, this is like Blue's Clues. And I wait for your answer, right? If you said pro-choice, that's what I want you to say, but that is not true. Pro-choice is not the opposite of pro-life. Pro-death is the opposite of pro-life. The opposite of pro-choice is anti-choice, or lack of agency, limited choice. So those are not two sides, pro-life and pro-choice. Those are two different conversations. But we have this idea that that every issue is sided. It's a trap. It's not true. So, and also think about something that does feel sided, like maybe gun control, which of course I would still argue, it's not just pro guns, not anti guns. Like that's not real. But even in that, think of the little like perspectives, right? So how many people do you know that are totally pro-gun but only for hunting, right? Or are pro-gun but actually it's more about gun safety instead of actual guns, or anti-gun but not in these cases, right? So think of a specific argument as like a strain or a thread in a larger quilt or blanket, right? That you're narrowing in on a specific argument that comes from that community concern you set up in speech one. And you're doing research and looking to like, what are people saying? Like you're building that argument, but you don't have to create it or make it. You're pulling from research and what are people saying that we should do and what's the best way to do it, etc. So now the next part will come and it'll tell you some guidelines and tips that'll hopefully help. And if you have any questions, I'm here. I'm going to be around all next week. Let me know. Set up an appointment. Office hours in person 10 to noon on Tuesdays, but it's even easier for me to set up an appointment just for you. You can come in and we can hang out, or we can do it on the video. Fine with that. Or I can phone call as well, which is I know nobody wants a phone call because, but all right. Have a beautiful day. I'll talk to you soon. So when we're trying to do persuasion, what's the main thing we're trying to do? What's the main thing we're trying to do? Make change. That's it. We're trying to make change. So, what are we trying to change? If you've seen the videos from the last couple of weeks, you know this. Values, beliefs, attitudes, behaviors. Those are the things you're trying to change. And what can I change? What is even possible to change? And what will make the biggest change? And remember, you can't, your speech doesn't work if you're not talking to your target audience, right? because change can only come from your target audience. And if you're arguing for change that, like, if you're asking for something that already exists, it's not change. So that's called the status quo. So, target audience, right, is those who can do what you're asking and are willing. So, if you're, trying to persuade all of us to go to college, like we're not your target audience. We've already been to college. But if you're trying to, and if you're trying to persuade all of us that college is important, what do you gain? So that's the other piece. You're thinking about change. What's the change? What change needs to happen? And what do I get if I do my goal? So I would literally write your goal like up on your sheet of paper, right? What is the change that you want? And so, and usually it is, go as like direct and ground level as you can. So I had a student in class yesterday, and her argumentation speech was excellent. It was all about why you should get bigger tanks for your fish, specifically betta fish. And apparently most stores like Walmart recommend these smaller tanks, and then there's all this research that says there's all these ways that fish can die in the smaller tanks. And I was asking her, like, okay, what is the change you're trying to make? She's like, well, I'm trying to get people to buy bigger tanks. It's like, why? What's the so what? What do you get? And she's like, well, if they buy, like, I want them to buy bigger. It's like, what's the goal? And finally it's like, less dead fish. That's the goal, right? If you're doing some big right, there is probably less death, less destruction, less hungry people, less homeless people, less people being bullied, more pay for underprivileged people, right? Like, there's probably some level of change happening where something needs to change because it is oppressive, unethical, unserving for a group, right? So, a couple things here. The first thing is, a lot of times what happens is people understand that something needs to change, but then what they actually do is they don't do that in their speech. They spend a ton of time telling us why it's bad. So let's pick a topic like if you're sorry, I'm trying to come up with a I'm trying to come up with a really good one. So let's say I just did some stuff with gender stuff, right? And when babies are born and they don't neatly fit the male and female categories, right? They're under this umbrella called intersex. And what often happens is, depending on, and there's a lot of ways that you can be intersex. Go watch the BuzzFeed video if you want to know more of what I'm talking about. What often happens is they will do surgeries, and research shows that even though the doctors are saying, if you don't do the surgery, if you don't fix this deformity, this will affect your child mentally, they'll have all these health problems. Well, the research shows that's not true. The research shows that actually, if you do have the surgery, that's where the health problems are, and that's often where it causes some mental and emotional stuff. So, in theory, in that first speech, I've set up what intersex is and what these surgeries are and how often they happen and like all of this information. And if you haven't completely set your topic up in the first speech, and sometimes even if you have, it's really tempting to spend this whole persuasive speech convincing us why doing these surgeries is bad. And let's say you do. First of all, it's very hard to change our values. Probably if we get on board, we've already had that value. Like, we already are not into doing surgeries on kids, right? Like, or we just didn't know. Do you see what I'm saying? Like, you're not going to be able to change our values. So you might make us aware of the issue. But once you make us aware, most likely, most of the people in your target audience will already agree it's bad. So then you don't have a target audience. But even if you do, and even if you convince us, what do you get? What do you get? You don't get less surgeries. You don't, I guess you might get ambassadors, but there's only 20 of us. I mean, if this was 1,000 people and you were educating, that might be one thing, but like, ideally, if the goal is less surgeries, tell me where they're happening. Tell me how they happen. Tell me what education needs to happen. Tell me what other people have done to make this change in the past. This is the other thing to remember. You are not reinventing the wheel. You are joining a conversation. So I can't imagine there's going to be anybody that like invents solutions, right? Go find out what's working, right? If your topic is homelessness, I mean, Milwaukee literally eradicated homelessness for veterans. How did they do it? How can we do it for non-veterans? There's a city out west, I don't remember which one it is, they have no homeless problem hardly at all. Statistically super low. How did they do it? Go find what has worked other places. Go find what people are saying, and then figure out how it connects to us. So here is then the next thing, or sometimes a problem, but the thing to think about. Think about your tension between individual solutions and big policy changes. Because individual solutions are going to be easier to implement and will probably be convinced at some level if we're in your target audience and you're persuasive. But bigger policy changes make bigger change, but they're way harder to do. So the topic that I always think of is pollution. Because what a lot of times people do is they set up the problem, the issue of pollution. The goal is Earth, right? Like less damage to the Earth. And then they give me all these personal solutions. Recycle, don't litter. The big one, take less showers, energy consumption, change your light bulbs. Change your light bulbs, take less showers. And I'm like, I take very fast showers. I cut down a few years ago. But even if you do all of that, right? Research shows that it's like 80, I haven't looked recently, 85% of carbon emissions, general pollution, comes from corporations. So if you really want to make change in pollution, you need to regulate the corporations, which is way harder to do than convincing 20 of us to take 30 seconds off our shower time. But you've got companies like Miller, Sprecher in town here, and I don't remember, I gotta get the date right. And I don't think I told you this. I may have told you this in a previous video, but basically they dump more beer in a day because it doesn't fit their quality standards than Sprecher brews in like a year. Maybe it's a week that they dump. I don't remember the exact statistics, but if you've got companies like, here I am taking shorter showers and it's literally a drop in the bucket, right? So you want to think about the balance between individual solutions and larger systemic solutions. Can you convince us all to exercise more? Sure. But if we change, actually sex ed's better. Can you convince us all to have safe sex, use protection, do our own research, know what's happening, all of that? Sure. But that's 20 people, and and we're pretty old. Some of us probably, it's like, that might be useful, but not as useful. But if you institute sex ed in middle school, research shows that makes major change, right? But it's harder to do policy change than it is individual solutions. And that doesn't mean you can't do both. And even making us aware of the policy changes, and then is there anything that we can do? Can we sign an online petition? Can we call somebody? These drag bans that are happening right now, we should all be calling our representatives and writing hand notes, because the government is archaic and they value hand notes, handwritten notes. What? That's the way you make change, is you handwrite your representative. No wonder the like people with a lot of time and money on their hands get their way, because they've got time to do it. Old people writing hand notes, right? And honestly, persuasion is hard. It's really, really, really hard. So don't be afraid to say that out loud, right? If you're trying to get us to quit smoking, if you're trying to get us to quit drinking and driving, what often happens is people spend the whole speech telling me why it's bad and why it should change. And I'm like, I agree. But you need to at least recognize Wisconsin drinking culture. You need to at least recognize that good people drive drunk and make a mistake. you need to tell us, like, hey, I know this is hard. Here's what sometimes happens in a moment, right? So, thinking about what you can say out loud to say, I know this is hard. Here are little things you can do, right? Um, you know, a lot of these topics want us get distracted driving, drinking and driving, smoking, right? Like, it should be easy to just say, this shouldn't be a problem, just fix it, right? But it's so much more complicated than that, right? It should be easy to say these surgeries on little babies that don't fit our social norms are hurting people and there's no good reason to do them, so stop doing them. And our culture, our sex binary, um, the norms, let's blame the parents. And it's like often doctors are coming to the parents and saying, something's wrong with your kid, we can fix it. If you don't know any better, I mean, there's a person on campus, Eric Lohman. I feel comfortable telling you this because him and his wife wrote a book. It's called Raising Rosie, if you want to look it up. I mean, Lohman has a PhD, and I've talked to him personally, and he's like, I have a PhD, and it was hard to navigate the research and to know what to do. I can't even imagine, if I wasn't equipped as a parent to do that. I would absolutely believe a doctor coming in. Well, how do you educate doctors? That kind of thing, right? So, be aware. What are you trying to change? Values, beliefs, attitudes, behaviors. I would focus on attitudes and behaviors. It's rare, but there might be one or two of your topics that do benefit from sort of a cultural mind shift, information refocusing, things we need to know. A lot of the mental health conversation before we could even get to people enrolling in therapy, behavior change, people being on meds, behavior change. Do you see what I'm saying? Mental health release at work and school, behavior change, policy change. Before we even needed to do that, we needed to destigmatize mental health, which is an attitude change, and maybe at some level a belief change. So you're joining a conversation. You're trying to use your structure and information to make an argument that's going to make change in your community concern. And how do I get the biggest bang for my buck, and what does it matter? Because don't spend your whole time going, okay, do this, do this, do this, do this, and then you realize even if we do it, you don't get anything, right? And so one of the things to make sure is that you're not persuading me of something that already exists. Remember, and I've said this in other videos, the only way you can do that is if you show threat. So if I want to argue that we should keep the mock trial team on campus, we already have a mock trial team. That's not going to be interesting to persuade you we need mock trial at UWM. But if that program is in trouble and they're threatening to cut it, and I can show threat, then I can persuade you we need to save it, right? I'm going to talk about reproductive rights, so if that's a hard topic, feel free to tune me out, and then I'll wave when I'm done. But it's a great example because Roe v. Wade, which took effect, I'm not going to remember the year, 60s, 70s. I'm tempted to stop the video and just go like that. It's not in my brain, right? But, decades we've had Roe v. Wade, and no matter how you feel about access to abortion, right? But the Democrats have been the party that supports, access, choice. But what's fascinating is abortions go down under Democratic rule. That's true. Look it up. You can be like, Mizzo's up on her soapbox. That's just a fact, right? And I've read it a bunch of places, so I don't have one source to cite, but you can easily look it up. The Google machine is magical. But anyway, we've known for years, since before Trump took office. I mean, that was one of the things Trump was very open about, was that he was going to nominate a Supreme Court justice to take away abortion access. And Democrats have had decades to ratify it, to protect it, because there was threat, and they never did. And so, you could have, I mean, now the persuasion is easy because we don't have access. We don't in Wisconsin because the legislature does not support access in Wisconsin because it defaulted to the state rights. But even a few years ago when Roe v. Wade happened, and if they reinstate it, if you can show threat, you can persuade we need to do more, ratify it, save it, whatever. So you're using your organization and your information, right, to really convince us of what we need to do. And don't be afraid to tell us it's hard. And don't be afraid to tell us that this is big structural change, but here's what we need to do as individuals to contribute. Or here's what we can do individually that might not make a lot of change, but every plastic bottle we recycle helps, right? So, and don't be afraid to dig deep into your topic and to actually do the things that'll make change. Don't spend your time talking about what you think you should talk about. Talk about things that actually will get change to happen and actually get us to do things or make change somehow. Okay. Email me if you have any questions. Don't let any of this mess you up. If you already had plans, make change. Let this help how it helps, and if it doesn't, totally fine. Let me know if you need anything. Have a beautiful day.